The rain fell gently against the windows of Miller's cafe, steady and rhythmic, a soothing backdrop that masked the tension soon to come. Jack Harmon sat in his usual corner booth, fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. His calloused hands, permanently stained with wood stain and honest work, told the story of a man who built things with his own strength. Across from him, 6-year-old Lily swung her legs beneath the red vinyl seat, her small fingers carefully arranging sugar packets into what she called her tiny white soldiers. Her auburn curls caught the soft amber light from the vintage pendant lamps overhead, and her bright green eyes, so like her mother's, sparkled with the kind of wonder that only comes from seeing magic in ordinary things. These Tuesday evening visits to Miller's had become their sacred ritual over the past year. After Jack finished his woodworking for the day and picked Lily up from her after-school program, they would drive the winding road from their small house into the heart of Riverdale. The cafe, nestled between Harper's Used Books and a small flower shop called Petals and Pine, felt like stepping into a different era. The walls were lined with exposed brick adorned with local artwork and vintage photographs of the town's founding families. Ellen Miller moved between tables with the practiced grace of someone who had been serving coffee and comfort for over 2 decades. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her apron bore the cheerful stains of a day spent crafting lattes and plating homemade pie. She had known Jack since he was Lily's age, back when his father used to bring him here for hot chocolate and stories about working at the steel mill. "How's the Henderson Library project coming along?" Ellen asked as she refilled Jack's coffee cup, the steam rising like small prayers in the warm air. "Should be finished by next week. Mrs. Henderson wants custom built-ins, real cherry wood hand-carved details. It's the kind of project you don't see much anymore." Ellen nodded approvingly. "Your father would be proud. He always said you had the hands for fine work." Jack's father had been the one to teach him woodworking, passing down not just the technical skills, but the philosophy behind the craft. "Measure twice, cut once," the old man used to say. "And remember, son, you're not just building furniture or fixing houses, you're building trust, creating something that will outlast you." That philosophy had guided Jack through his toughest times, including the dark months after Rebecca's death, when he wondered if he could raise Lily alone. The steady rhythm of saw and hammer, the satisfaction of transforming raw lumber into something beautiful and functional, these had been his anchor during those storms. "Daddy, look," Lily had arranged her sugar packet soldiers into a perfect circle. "They're protecting the castle." She pointed to the sugar dispenser in the center. "That's a mighty fine castle guard." Jack leaned forward to examine her work with the seriousness it deserved. "What are they protecting the castle from?" Lily considered this carefully, her small face scrunched in concentration. "From people who want to take away the sweetness." The innocence of her answer struck Jack like a gentle blow to the chest. In her simple worldview, the soldiers existed to protect sweetness, to guard against those who would steal joy and wonder from the world. If only life were that straightforward. "Can we get hot chocolate before we go?" Lily asked, performing the ritual dance of request and permission that marked their evening routine. "With marshmallows, the little ones. Big marshmallows are for emergencies only." Jack smiled at their private joke. The distinction between small and large marshmallows had become important after a particularly difficult night following Rebecca's funeral, when Jack had made hot chocolate with the jumbo marshmallows he'd found in the pantry. "These are emergency marshmallow," he'd told her through his own tears, "for when our hearts need extra comfort." Ever since they'd maintained this solemn marshmallow classification system, Ellen appeared with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, the little marshmallows already floating like tiny life preservers in the rich dark liquid. "On the house, rain day special." As Lily wrapped her small hands around the warm mug, being careful not to disturb her sugar packet, guards, Jack felt that familiar surge of contentment. This quiet life they had built together, this peaceful routine, this safe harbor they called home, it was enough. The tattoo of the Marine Corps emblem on his forearm had faded somewhat over the years, but the discipline and focus he'd learned in the service remained redirected now toward raising his daughter and building a life of quality and care. "Daddy, why do grown-ups always look so worried?" Lily asked suddenly, her question emerging from that mysterious place where young minds make connections adults have forgotten how to see. Jack followed her gaze across the cafe, taking in the scene with fresh eyes. The businessman in the corner was indeed frowning at his phone, his shoulders hunched with tension. Two women at a table near the window spoke in hushed, urgent tones over barely touched coffee cups. Even Mrs. Abernathy, the retired librarian who usually radiated calm authority, seemed distracted as she stirred her tea with unusual vigor. Well, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups forget to notice the good things because they're too busy worrying about the difficult things. But worrying doesn't fix anything. Does it? No, it doesn't. But sometimes people worry instead of taking action because taking action feels scary. Lily nodded solemnly as if this made perfect sense to her. Like when I was scared to ride my bike without training wheels, but then I did it and it wasn't scary anymore. Exactly like that. Jack marveled once again at his daughter's ability to distill complex truths into simple, actionable wisdom. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mike Donovan, a fellow veteran who worked primarily as a mechanic at the auto shop down the street. Mike slid into the booth across from them, his work clothes bearing the same honest stains that marked Jack's daily uniform. Evening, Jack. Hey there, Princess Lily. Mike tipped an imaginary hat to the little girl who giggled at his theatrical greeting. Mike, how's the Peterson engine coming? Jack was grateful for the company and the opportunity to talk shop with someone who understood the satisfaction of working with his hands. Frustrating as hell. Sorry, kiddo. Frustrating as heck. Guy wants his '67 Mustang restored, but he wants it done cheap and fast, and he also wants it to look like something out of those fancy car magazines. He doesn't understand that quality takes time. Jack nodded sympathetically. He had made the deliberate choice to work primarily on renovation and custom projects, preferring to work with homeowners who appreciated craftsmanship over speed. It meant less money sometimes, but it also meant he could take pride in every joint, every finish, every detail that would bear his reputation for decades to come. Mrs. Henderson showed me her grandfather's workshop notes yesterday. Jack's eyes brightened as he spoke about his current project. The man was a true artisan. Dovetailed joints, hidden hardware wood, selected not just for appearance, but for how it will age and develop character over time. That's the difference, Mike agreed. People like Mrs. Henderson understand that they're not just buying furniture. They're investing in something that will become part of their family story. These developers, they just see square footage and profit margins. Lily had been listening to their conversation with the serious attention she gave to all adult discussions, occasionally nodding as if she understood the deeper implications of their trade philosophies. Ellen appeared with a coffee for Mike and fresh hot chocolate for Lily, having anticipated their needs with the intuitive service that made Miller's Cafe feel more like someone's kitchen than a commercial establishment. You gentlemen discussing the state of honest work again? Ellen asked with a knowing smile. Always, Jack replied. Mike's dealing with customers who want miracles on impossible timelines. Sounds familiar. Ellen settled into the booth for a moment, clearly grateful for the excuse to rest her feet. I had a corporate coffee chain scout in here last week offering to buy me out. Said they could optimize the space for maximum customer throughput and profit efficiency. She shook her head with gentle disgust. I told them that optimizing the soul out of a place isn't improvement, it's vandalism. The conversation captured everything Jack loved about their small community. Here were people who understood the difference between making a living and making a life, who valued relationships over profit margins, who built their businesses around serving their neighbors rather than extracting maximum value from anonymous consumers. Mike talked about the young veteran he had hired as an apprentice mechanic, a kid struggling to find his place after returning from overseas service. Reminds me of myself 20 years ago. Lost angry, needing something real to focus on. Give a man a trade, teach him to build something with his hands, and you give him a foundation for rebuilding himself. Ellen shared stories of the students who treated the cafe as their study hall, how she had watched them progress from anxious freshmen to confident graduates, how some of them still stop by years later to share news of their careers, their marriages, their own young families. Jack found himself thinking about his own journey. How woodworking had provided structure during his wildest years after leaving the Marines. How meeting Rebecca had given him a reason to build a stable future. How losing her had nearly broken him before Lily reminded him that some things are too precious to abandon no matter how much they hurt. Daddy makes beautiful things. Lily announced suddenly, apparently deciding that the adults needed to understand this fundamental truth about her father. He sure does, sweetheart, Ellen agreed warmly. Your daddy fixed my kitchen cabinets last spring, and they're still the prettiest cabinets in Riverdale. He's teaching me how to make a jewelry box for my treasures. Lily continued warming to her subject, with secret compartments and everything. Secret compartments, Mike asked with exaggerated amazement. That sounds like advanced carpentry to me. It's not that advanced, Lily said seriously. You just have to think about where someone would want to hide something special, and then you make a place for it. The adults exchanged glances over her head, struck once again by the startling wisdom that occasionally emerged from her young perspective. Where someone would want to hide something special, and then you make a place for it. It was perhaps the most accurate description of what made a house become a home that any of them had ever heard. As the evening progressed, their corner of the cafe became a small island of community connection. Other patrons occasionally joined the conversation. Mrs. Chun discussing her plans for a reading garden behind the library. Young Pastor Thompson sharing his vision for a youth center that would give local teenagers a safe place to gather. Dr. Sarah Wilson talking about the mobile clinic she hoped to establish for elderly residents who had difficulty traveling to medical appointments. These were the conversations that reinforced Jack's choice to build his life in Riverdale. Here, people still knew each other's names, still cared about each other's dreams, still believed that individual actions could make a meaningful difference in their shared community. It wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it was real, authentic, grounded in values that went deeper than profit margins and efficiency metrics. Lily had fallen asleep in the booth, her head pillowed on her arms, her breathing slow and peaceful. The sugar packet soldiers still stood guard over their makeshift castle, a testament to her unwavering belief in the importance of protecting sweetness from those who would steal it away. Jack looked at his daughter's sleeping face, so peaceful and trusting, and felt the familiar surge of protective love that had defined his life since the moment she was born. Everything he built, every choice he made, every priority he set, and it all came back to her, to creating a world where her natural optimism and kindness could flourish without being crushed by cynicism or cruelty. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against the windows, and the cafe's warmth seemed to deepen as the evening settled around them. In a few minutes, he would gently wake Lily and guide her sleepy steps to the truck, where she would curl up in her car seat for the short drive home. Tomorrow would bring another day of honest work, another evening of shared stories, another small step in the careful construction of the life they were building together. None of them could have imagined that their peaceful world was about to collide with forces that would test everything they thought they knew about courage, justice, and the true cost of standing up for what's right. But tonight there was only warmth, community, and the quiet satisfaction of belonging somewhere that felt like home. The soft chime of the cafe door should have been just another gentle note in the evening's peaceful symphony. But something about this particular entrance made Jack look up from his conversation with Mike. Three men stepped into Miller's cafe, and immediately the atmosphere shifted like the atmospheric pressure drop that precedes a severe storm. They weren't dressed like the usual evening patrons. Where most people who came to Ellen's cafe wore the comfortable clothes of small-town life flannel shirts, worn jeans, practical footwear, these three men were wrapped in expensive suits that seemed out of place under the warm amber lighting. Their shoes gleamed with the kind of polish that suggested they had never walked on anything more challenging than polished marble floors. But it wasn't their clothes that triggered Jack's instincts. It was their eyes, cold and calculating, constantly scanning the room as if cataloging weaknesses and escape routes. These were predators, and Jack's protective instincts, honed by years in the Marines and refined by keeping Lily safe in an unpredictable world, immediately went on high alert. The tallest of the three, a man with salt and pepper hair and the kind of practiced smile that never reached his eyes, approached Ellen at the counter. His voice carried the smooth authority of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation dressed as courtesy. Good evening, we're looking for someone who might have stopped in here tonight. A woman about 5'6", dark hair, probably looking nervous or distressed. Ellen's response was immediate and protective. She had been serving this community for over 20 years, and she knew the difference between legitimate concern and predatory hunting. I'm sorry, but I don't discuss my customers with strangers. The man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps you misunderstood. We're with Cromwell Security Consulting. This woman is in considerable danger, and we're here to help her. Then perhaps you should contact the police. Ellen's voice carried the steel that had allowed her to maintain order in her cafe during everything from teenage drama to adult disagreements. They're trained to handle situations involving people in danger. The second man, shorter but with the compact build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition, leaned against the counter in a way that was meant to appear casual, but came across as subtly threatening. The police aren't equipped to handle this particular type of danger. We have specialized training. Mike had stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Jack. Both men were now paying careful attention to the exchange at the counter. Other patrons had also begun to take notice, conversations dying down as people unconsciously responded to the tension that had entered their peaceful refuge. Jack carefully shifted his position so that his body was between the sleeping Lily and the three strangers. His movement was subtle, practiced the automatic response of a father who had spent years positioning himself as the first line of defense for his daughter. The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up from his position near the door. "We know she's been in contact with local residents. Someone matching her description was seen entering this establishment approximately 90 minutes ago, seen by whom Ellen asked, her protective instincts now fully engaged. And why exactly should I believe that you're the good guys in this situation?" The tall man's facade of polite professionalism began to crack. "Ma'am, we're trying to prevent a very dangerous situation from escalating. This woman has information that could put innocent people at risk. We need to locate her immediately." "What kind of information?" Dr. Wilson asked from her table near the window. As the town's only physician, she was accustomed to asking direct questions when people's safety was at stake. The three men exchanged quick glances, clearly not expecting to face organized questioning from multiple community members. Their presence had been meant to intimidate a single business owner into compliance, not to justify themselves to an entire room full of concerned neighbors. "That's classified information," the compact man said curtly. "We're not at liberty to discuss the details of an ongoing investigation." "Investigation by whom?" Pastor Thompson asked, his voice carrying the gentle authority that made him effective at mediating community disputes. "What organization are you gentlemen representing exactly?" The tension in the room continued to escalate as more patrons turned their attention to the confrontation. Mrs. Chun set down her book and removed her reading glasses, preparing to focus completely on the situation. The university students had closed their laptops and were watching with the intense attention that comes from recognizing that something significant is happening. Jack noticed that all three men wore identical watches, expensive chronographs that seemed more tactical than decorative. They moved with the coordinated precision of a team that had worked together before, positioning themselves to control different areas of the cafe. Most telling of all, the man by the door had positioned himself to block the most direct exit route. These weren't security consultants responding to an emergency. These were hunters who had lost track of their prey and were trying to intimidate the local population into helping them continue the chase. "I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave," Ellen said firmly. "If you have legitimate concerns about someone's safety, take them to the proper authorities. This is a place of business, not an interrogation center." The tall man's mask of professionalism finally slipped completely. "This isn't a request, lady. We have reason to believe that you're harboring someone who poses a significant security risk. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but we're not leaving empty-handed." That was when Jack stood up. Not quickly, not aggressively, but with the deliberate, measured movement of someone who had made a decision and was preparing to act on it. Mike immediately followed his lead, recognizing the shift in his friend's demeanor. "Actually," Jack said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who wasn't looking for trouble, but wouldn't back down from it either, "I think Ellen made herself pretty clear. This is her establishment, and she's asked you to leave." The compact man turned to face Jack directly, clearly sizing him up as a potential threat. "This doesn't concern you, Carpenter. Stay out of it, and nobody gets hurt." The casual mention of Jack's profession confirmed what he had already suspected. These men had done their homework, probably identifying and researching every regular patron of the cafe. They weren't just looking for one woman, they were prepared to intimidate an entire community to get what they wanted. "When strangers come into our neighborhood and start threatening our friends, it becomes our concern." Mike stepped up beside Jack. Maybe it's time for you boys to move along. The atmosphere in the cafe had transformed completely. What had been a peaceful evening of community connection had become a tense standoff between locals and outsiders, between people protecting their neighbors and predators hunting their quarry. Hunter Wilson had quietly moved to a position where she could reach her phone quickly if medical assistance became necessary. Pastor Thompson had stood up, placing himself between the confrontation and the elderly Mrs. Chun, who was watching the proceedings with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. The man by the door spoke into a small communication device attached to his collar, his voice too low for anyone in the cafe to understand the words, but his intention was clear. He was calling for backup or reporting on the situation to someone in authority. That was when the cafe door opened again, and the woman they were hunting stumbled inside. She was exactly as the tall man had described, about 5'6", dark hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing clothes that suggested she had been traveling hard and fast. But what struck Jack immediately wasn't her appearance. It was her eyes. They held the particular combination of exhaustion and desperate determination that he recognized from his own mirror during the darkest days after Rebecca's death. This was someone who had been running not from justice but toward it, someone who had sacrificed everything safe and comfortable in her life to do what she believed was right and was now facing the terrible cost of that choice. The woman took one look at the three men and immediately understood her mistake. She had walked directly into the trap they had set for her, and now she was surrounded by predators in a room full of innocent people who could become collateral damage in whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Her eyes swept the room quickly, taking in the faces of the community members who had unconsciously arranged themselves into a protective formation around Ellen's counter. When her gaze met Jack's, he saw something that made his decision for him. She wasn't asking for help. She was apologizing for bringing danger into this peaceful place where families came to share hot chocolate and neighbors came to connect with each other. She was preparing to sacrifice herself to protect people she had never met because that was the kind of person she was. That was when Lily woke up, took one look at the scene unfolding around their booth, and whispered the words that would change everything. "Daddy, she needs help." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down by innocence itself, cutting through all the adult complexity and political maneuvering to expose the simple, undeniable truth of the situation. Lily had awakened to find their peaceful cafe transformed into something resembling a standoff, and her 6-year-old moral compass had immediately identified the essential reality: someone needed help. Jack looked down at his daughter, who was now sitting up in the booth, her auburn curls disheveled from sleep, her green eyes wide with concern but not fear. Even at 6 years old, Lily possessed an uncanny ability to see through surface complications to the heart of any situation. She didn't understand corporate espionage or security consultants or whatever larger forces were at play here. She simply saw a woman who was afraid and men who were causing that fear. "Daddy, she needs help," Lily repeated more urgently, this time her small hand reaching out to grasp Jack's wrist. "Look at her face. She's scared just like I was when I got lost at the county fair." Remember, the comparison hit Jack like a physical blow. He did remember that day 3 months ago when Lily had wandered away from him in the crowded fairgrounds and spent 20 terrifying minutes convinced she would never find her way back to safety. When he had finally located her, she had looked exactly like the woman standing frozen in the cafe doorway, exhausted, desperately hopeful, and trying to be brave in the face of overwhelming circumstances. The woman in question had pressed herself against the door as if she might somehow melt through it and disappear. Her dark eyes darted between the three men and the exit, calculating odds that clearly weren't in her favor. She wore simple jeans and a navy sweater that had seen better days and carried a worn leather messenger bag clutched against her chest like armor. But it was her posture that told the real story. This wasn't someone running from consequences of her own making. This was someone who had discovered something terrible and was trying to do the right thing about it, despite the personal cost. Jack recognized the particular way she held herself, the stance of someone who had accepted that doing what's right might require sacrificing everything safe and comfortable in her life. The tall man who appeared to be the leader of the 3-person hunting party noticed the woman at the same moment Lily spoke. His cold smile returned, but now it carried genuine menace rather than false courtesy. "Victoria." He pronounced her name like it was a verdict. "There you are. You've caused us quite a lot of trouble tonight. So her name was Victoria. Jack filed that information away while continuing to process the dynamics of the situation. The use of her first name suggested a familiarity that went beyond professional hunting. These people had worked together before, or at least knew each other well enough to dispense with formal courtesy. Marcus told us she'd probably run to ground somewhere like this. The compact man added, gesturing dismissively at the cafe's warm, welcoming atmosphere. Someplace cozy and civilian where you could hide behind innocent people. The contempt in his voice when he said innocent people told Jack everything he needed to know about how these three viewed the community members they were prepared to threaten and intimidate. To them, the regular patrons of Miller's Cafe weren't human beings with their own rights and dignity. They were simply obstacles to be moved or leveraged to be used. Victoria straightened her shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength that belied her exhausted appearance. "I'm not hiding behind anyone. I came here because I needed to think, and this seemed like a place where people still believed in common decency." "Common decency doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart," the third man said from his position by the door. "And it definitely doesn't protect you from the consequences of stealing proprietary information." "I didn't steal anything," Victoria said firmly. "I documented criminal activity and reported it through proper channels. The fact that those channels were compromised doesn't make me a thief." The exchange revealed layers of context that helped Jack understand the stakes involved. This wasn't just about one woman running from corporate security. This was about someone who had discovered wrongdoing, tried to report it legitimately, and found herself targeted for elimination when the people she trusted turned out to be part of the problem. Ellen had moved closer to the phone behind her counter, her hand hovering near the receiver as she calculated whether calling the police would help or escalate the situation. Dr. Wilson had positioned herself where she could assist if anyone got injured, while Pastor Thompson had begun moving the elderly Mrs. Chun toward the back exit just in case things went badly. But Lily was still focused on the essential moral question that adults seemed determined to complicate with considerations of safety, legality, and political complexity. She tugged on Jack's sleeve again, more insistently this time. "Daddy, are we going to help her?" The question hung in the cafe air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Every person in the room, community members and predators alike, understood that this 6-year-old had just articulated the choice that would define not just the next few minutes, but the kind of people they were and the kind of community they had built together. Jack felt the weight of multiple responsibilities pressing down on him simultaneously. His primary obligation was to protect Lily, to ensure that his daughter didn't become collateral damage in whatever conflict these strangers had brought into their peaceful refuge. But he also felt the pull of the values he had tried to instill in her through years of bedtime stories and everyday examples. The belief that strong people protect those who need help, that right and wrong aren't negotiable based on convenience, that sometimes standing up for others is worth accepting personal risk. He looked around the cafe at the faces of his neighbors and friends, people who had become his chosen family in the years since Rebecca's death. Ellen, who had never charged him for the countless cups of coffee during those early months when he could barely afford groceries and needed human connection more than caffeine. Mike, who had shared jobs and helped him learn to balance single parenthood with running his own business. Dr. Wilson, who had taken care of Lily through every childhood illness with the gentle competence that made her beloved throughout the community. These people had created something precious here, a space where individuals mattered, where neighbors looked out for each other, where a single father and his daughter could find acceptance and support without having to prove their worth or navigate complex social hierarchies. It was the kind of community that existed only when people were willing to stand up for shared values, even when standing up involved personal risk. The tall man was getting impatient with the extended silence. "This is a private matter. Everyone just needs to mind their own business and nobody gets hurt." But that was exactly wrong, Jack realized. This couldn't be a private matter anymore, because the moment these three had brought their hunt into Miller's Cafe, they had made it everyone's business. They had violated the sanctuary of the community gathering place, threatened Ellen's authority in her own establishment, and demonstrated their willingness to intimidate innocent people to achieve their goals. Most importantly, they had done all of this in front of Lily, who was now waiting for the adults around her to demonstrate whether the values they had taught her through words and stories would hold up when tested by real-world pressures. "Daddy," she said again, more quietly this time, but with complete trust that he would make the right choice. Jack looked down at his daughter's face, so full of faith in him and in the basic goodness of the world they had built together. Then he looked at Victoria, who was still pressed against the door, resigned to facing whatever came next, but refusing to compromise others in her struggle for survival. Finally, he looked at the three predators who had invaded their community space and were now demanding that everyone ignore their conscience and abandon a person in need because it would be more convenient and safer to do so. The choice, when he saw it clearly, wasn't really a choice at all. Jack stood up slowly, placing himself between his daughter and the three strangers, but also between Victoria and the men who were hunting her. His movement was deliberate, unmistakable in its meaning, and it sent ripples of decision through the room as other community members recognized what was happening and began to choose their own positions. Lily is right. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had made peace with the consequences of his decision. She needs help, and we don't abandon people who need help, especially not in our own neighborhood. The words once spoken changed everything. The peaceful Tuesday evening at Miller's Cafe was over. And whatever came next would test everything they thought they knew about courage, community, and the price of standing up for what's right. The moment Jack spoke those words, the atmosphere in Miller's Cafe shifted from tense standoff to something far more dangerous and decisive. He had crossed the invisible line between observer and participant, between someone hoping trouble would pass them by and someone willing to stand directly in its path. The three hunters immediately recognized the change, their body language shifting from casual intimidation to focused threat assessment. The tall man's cold smile vanished entirely, replaced by the calculating expression of someone reassessing his tactical situation. "You're making a very serious mistake, Carpenter," his voice dropping to the low, controlled tone that preceded violence. "This woman is a corporate spy who has stolen proprietary information worth millions of dollars. Interfering with our recovery operation makes you an accessory to industrial espionage." But Jack had spent years learning to read people's intentions through their actions rather than their words. During his most difficult period after Rebecca's death, when grief had made him suspicious of everyone's motives, he had developed an instinct for distinguishing between those who meant what they said and those who used words as weapons. These three men moved like predators, spoke like bureaucrats, and threatened like criminals. Whatever they weren't legitimate security consultants. If she's really a spy and you're really corporate security, then you should have no problem calling the local police and letting them handle the situation according to proper legal procedures. Jack replied evenly, "Unless, of course, you're not who you claim to be." Mike stepped up beside his friend, understanding without words that they were now committed to this course of action together. "I've worked with plenty of corporate security teams on construction sites. They carry proper identification work through established legal channels, and they definitely don't threaten entire communities to get compliance." Dr. Wilson had moved closer to Victoria, her medical training automatically focusing on the woman's obvious exhaustion and stress. "You look like you haven't eaten or slept properly in days. Why don't you sit down and let me check your blood pressure?" The simple offer of medical care, professional, compassionate, and completely focused on human need rather than political complications, seemed to break something loose in Victoria's carefully maintained composure. Her eyes filled with tears that she immediately tried to blink away. "I can't. These people, they've been hunting me for 3 days. Anyone who helps me becomes a target. I can't do that to you." Honey, Ellen said firmly, moving out from behind her counter, with the authority of someone who had been making decisions about who was welcome in her establishment for over 2 decades. "You let us worry about what we can and can't handle. Right now, you look like someone who needs coffee, food, and a safe place to rest." The compact man laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Safe place. Lady, you have no idea what you're dealing with. This woman has information that could bring down entire corporations, destroy thousands of jobs, ruin innocent people's lives. You think your little coffee shop can protect her from the kind of resources that are being brought to bear?" Pastor Thompson had been listening carefully to the entire exchange, his trained ear catching the subtle inconsistencies in the three men's story. "If she really has information that could destroy innocent people's lives, then shouldn't that information be investigated by proper authorities rather than suppressed by private security teams?" he asked mildly. The question hung in the air, exposing the logical flaw in their intimidation strategy. If Victoria possessed evidence of genuine wrongdoing, then the appropriate response would be investigation and legal action, not the kind of aggressive suppression tactics these three were employing. Lily had been watching the adult conversation with the intense focus she brought to any situation where important decisions were being made. Now she slipped out of the booth and walked directly to Victoria, moving with the fearless compassion that only comes from a young person's absolute faith in the basic goodness of the world. "Hi," she said, looking up at the exhausted woman with eyes full of warmth and concern. "I'm Lily. My daddy makes beautiful things with wood, and Ellen makes the best hot chocolate in the whole world. Would you like to sit with us? We have extra marshmallows." The offer was so simple, so purely kind, that it seemed to physically stagger Victoria. She knelt down to Lily's level, her professional composure finally cracking completely as she found herself face to face with uncomplicated human decency. "That's very kind of you, sweetheart," she said softly. "But these men are right about one thing. I am in serious trouble, and being around me might not be safe for you and your daddy." Lily considered this with the serious attention she gave to all important information, then nodded as if reaching a conclusion. "Daddy always says that helping people who need help is more important than being safe," she announced. "And you need help right now." The 6-year-old's moral clarity cut through every adult complexity and political calculation in the room, reducing the entire situation to its essential truth. Someone needed help, and helping people was what good people did, regardless of personal risk or inconvenience. Jack felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's courage, even as his protective instincts screamed warnings about the danger she was potentially walking into. This was the moment every parent fears and hopes for simultaneously, the moment when your child becomes strong enough to make their own moral choices, even when those choices involve risk. The man by the door had grown tired of the extended discussion. "Enough," he said curtly, reaching inside his jacket for what was undoubtedly a weapon of some kind. "We have authorization to use whatever force is necessary to complete this recovery operation. Stand aside or deal with the consequences." That was when Jack's training kicked in. Not military training, which he had never fully left behind, but the deeper, more fundamental training that comes from years of working with dangerous tools, navigating hazardous job sites, and learning to stay calm under pressure when other people's safety depends on your decisions. He moved with deliberate precision, placing himself directly between the armed man and Lily while simultaneously positioning his body to shield both his daughter and Victoria. His movement wasn't aggressive or challenging. It was simply immovable, the stance of someone who had decided where he would stand and would not be moved from that position by threats or force. "Mike," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off the three predators, "would you mind escorting Lily to the kitchen area? I think Ellen might have some special cookies back there that need taste testing." Mike understood immediately, moving to gather Lily and guide her toward the relative safety of the cafe's back areas. But Lily resisted, her small hand reaching out toward Victoria with the stubborn determination that Jack recognized as his own temperament reflected in miniature. "She should come too," Lily insisted. "Everyone should come. We can all have cookies together, and maybe these men will remember how to be nice." The innocent suggestion that sharing cookies might somehow transform predators into reasonable people would have been laughable if not for the absolute sincerity with which it was offered. Lily genuinely believed that human goodness was stronger than human cruelty, and that even the most dangerous situations could be resolved through kindness and shared humanity. Her faith was about to be tested in ways that no 6-year-old should ever have to experience. The tall man had clearly reached the end of his patience with community discussion and moral philosophy. "This is your final warning," he announced to the room. "Anyone who interferes with our operation will be considered a hostile combatant and dealt with accordingly." Ellen moved to the phone behind her counter, but the compact man was faster, vaulting over the counter with surprising agility and placing his hand over the receiver before she could dial. "No police," he said firmly. "This is a matter of national security, and local law enforcement doesn't have the clearance to handle classified information." The claim was obviously fabricated. If this really were a legitimate national security operation, they would have proper identification, legal warrants, and official support rather than threats and intimidation. But the implications were clear. These three were prepared to prevent any outside intervention by whatever means necessary. Dr. Wilson had quietly moved to a position where she could reach her cell phone, but the man by the door noticed her movement and shook his head meaningfully. The message was unmistakable. Any attempt to call for help would result in immediate escalation to violence. The cafe that had been a sanctuary of community warmth and connection just minutes earlier had been transformed into a trap, with innocent people caught between predators and their prey. Every person in the room now faced the same choice Jack had made: submit to intimidation and abandon someone in desperate need, or stand up for their values regardless of personal cost. Pastor Thompson was the next to make his decision, stepping forward to stand beside Jack in the protective formation that was slowly forming between the predators and their target. "I've seen enough bullies in my time to recognize them," he said calmly. "Real security professionals don't threaten communities or prevent people from calling for legal assistance." Mrs. Chun, despite her age and apparent fragility, moved to join them as well. Her eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made her a formidable educator for 4 decades before her retirement. "Young men," she said with the authority that had once commanded respect from generations of students, "your behavior is absolutely unacceptable. You will leave this establishment immediately, or we will make you leave." One by one, the community members who had come to Miller's Cafe for nothing more than coffee, conversation, and connection found themselves choosing between safety and values, between self-preservation and standing up for what they knew was right. Three predators found themselves facing not just one stubborn carpenter, but an entire community that had decided to protect one of their own, even though Victoria wasn't actually one of their own yet. She was simply someone in trouble who had stumbled into their sanctuary. And that was enough. The standoff had reached its crucial moment. Whatever happened next would determine not just Victoria's fate, but the kind of community Riverdale would continue to be: a place where people protected each other, or a place where fear and intimidation could override moral courage when the stakes got high enough. Jack looked down at Lily, who was still holding Victoria's hand, with complete trust that the adults around her would find a way to make everything turn out right. Her faith in their collective goodness was about to be tested by fire, and he prayed that they would prove worthy of her trust. The threshold had been crossed. There was no turning back now. The standoff in Miller's Cafe reached its breaking point when the sound of powerful engines cut through the tension like thunder rolling across a clear sky. Several vehicles pulled into the small parking lot outside, their blue and red lights flashing through the rain-streaked windows. "What the hell?" The compact man muttered, his professional composure cracking as he watched uniformed figures emerge from the vehicles with military precision. Victoria's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of the fear or resignation that had marked her demeanor since arriving at the cafe, her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and suddenly she looked less like a hunted fugitive and more like someone accustomed to command authority in high-stakes situations. "About time," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strength that made everyone in the room reassess their assumptions about who she really was. "Your daughter Lily. She's remarkable." Victoria broke the silence first. "I've met heads of state with less moral courage than she showed last night." Jack felt the familiar surge of pride mixed with worry. "She sees the world in black and white, right and wrong, helping or not helping. I worry sometimes about what happens when she discovers all the gray areas in between." Victoria studied him, her gaze analytical in a way that suggested she was accustomed to dissecting problems and solutions rather than people and emotions. "The gray areas are where most people get lost, Mr. Harmon. They use complexity as an excuse for inaction. Your daughter cut through that. So did you. I'm just a carpenter who didn't like seeing someone threatened in Ellen's cafe." Victoria smiled for the first time since they'd met, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely attractive to something more complex and interesting. "No, Mr. Harmon. You're a carpenter who was willing to put himself between danger and a complete stranger because it was the right thing to do. That's increasingly rare in my experience." She walked toward his workshop, pausing at the entrance to examine the hand-carved sign above the door: "Harmon Custom Woodworking, built to last generations." "May I?" Jack nodded, following her inside. The workshop was his sanctuary, a converted barn with high ceilings and large windows that bathed the space in natural light. Tools hung in perfect orders along make walls: chisels, planes, and saws arranged by size and purpose. 3 workbenches occupied the center space, each dedicated to different stages of production. Half-finished projects stood in various states of completion: a rocking chair with intricately carved armrests, a dining table with inlaid marquetry, a small jewelry box with hidden compartments. Victoria moved through the space with unexpected reverence, her fingers hovering just above surfaces without touching, respecting the sawdust in the silence. Beautiful. Genuine craftsmanship. Every piece tells a story. Just wood and time. Jack watched her carefully, still uncertain about her presence in his most private space. No, Victoria stopped at the jewelry box Lily had mentioned the previous night. This isn't just anything. She gestured around the workshop. You're creating objects with soul, Mr. Harmon. Things designed to be passed down through generations to carry memories and meaning, her voice softened. My industry rarely thinks beyond the next upgrade cycle. Jack felt oddly exposed by her assessment, as if she'd seen something in his work that he hadn't intended to reveal. What exactly are you doing here, Miss Reynolds? I doubt you came to discuss woodworking philosophy. Victoria's business demeanor returned, her spine straightening as she turned to face him directly. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Harmon. One that could benefit both of us, and more importantly, this community. She outlined her vision in precise, measured terms. A community technology center built in Riverdale designed to bridge traditional craftsmanship with modern digital tools. A place where older workers could learn new skills, where young people could connect their digital fluency with hands-on creation, where small businesses could access resources typically available only to large corporations. The idea is to create a model that merges the best of both worlds. Victoria's eyes lit with genuine passion. 3D printers alongside traditional tools. Digital design software paired with hands-on mentoring. Small batch manufacturing that combines advanced technology with artisanal quality. Jack studied her face, looking for the catch. And what does Reynolds Technologies get out of this public relations tax write-off? Some kind of community experiment? Victoria's expression tightened, the first hint that his words had struck a nerve. A fair question. My company gets multiple benefits, yes, including positive PR. But there's something more valuable at stake. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. The tech industry has lost its way, Mr. Harmon. We've become so focused on disruption and scale that we've forgotten the humans we're supposed to be serving. And one community center in small-town Pennsylvania fixes that. It's a start, a proof of concept. If we can demonstrate that technology can empower communities rather than extract value from them, it might change how the entire industry approaches a development. Her gaze was steady, challenging. But I need someone who understands craftsmanship, community values, and practical problem solving. Someone who can translate between Silicon Valley thinking and real-world needs. Jack moved to the window, looking out toward his house, where Lily was spending the morning with Ellen. The proposition was unexpectedly appealing, touching on concerns he'd harbored about Riverdale's future. The steel mill's closure had hollowed out the town's economic core, and young people were leaving in steady streams, seeking opportunity elsewhere. But experience had taught him caution, especially when deals seemed too perfectly aligned with his own hopes. Why me? There must be thousands of more qualified people with backgrounds in both technology and traditional crafts. Because you stood up when it mattered. Because your daughter saw what needed to be done with absolute clarity. Because this community trusts you. Victoria's voice took on a harder edge. And frankly, because what I witnessed last night is exactly what's missing from how my industry approaches problems, moral clarity combined with practical action. Jack turned back to face her, still skeptical. And the fact that those men were hunting you, that you're involved in some kind of corporate espionage situation with the FBI, how does that factor into this perfect partnership? Victoria didn't flinch from the direct question. That's precisely why I need someone like you. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone who sees the ethical dimensions first, not just the technical or financial ones. She explained the situation in greater detail. Reynolds Technologies had been developing advanced surveillance software that could seamlessly integrate across multiple platforms, smartphones, smart home devices, vehicles, even public infrastructure. The stated purpose was to enhance security and user convenience, but Victoria had discovered a secret parallel development path, one that stripped away privacy safeguards and created backdoor access for unauthorized third parties. I built my company on the principle that technology should empower people, not exploit them. Victoria's voice was tight with controlled anger. When I discovered what William Brooks, my CFO, was doing, I tried to shut it down through proper channels. That's when I learned how deep the corruption went. board members compromised, regulatory contacts in their pocket. Even my private security detail couldn't be trusted. The seriousness of her situation became clearer. This wasn't just corporate infighting, it was a genuine threat with far-reaching implications. If what she described was accurate, the technology could create unprecedented surveillance capabilities in the wrong hands. So you ran with the evidence. Jack was beginning to understand the desperation he'd seen in her eyes the previous night. Victoria nodded. I copied the source code documentation of illegal tests and communication with potential buyers, including foreign entities that would raise serious national security concerns. The technology itself isn't illegal, but how they plan to implement and monetize it violates dozens of laws. Jack ran his hand along the smooth surface of a half-finished table, feeling the grain of the wood as he processed her story. Your proposition feels connected to this situation in ways I don't fully understand. The community center concept sounds worthwhile, but why now? Why here? Because what happened in your cafe last night reminded me of something essential. Victoria moved to stand beside him at the workbench. Technology without community values is just power without purpose. What I'm fighting against at Reynolds Technologies is what happens when we separate technical capability from human consequences. She placed a small flash drive on the workbench. This contains the basic outline of the community center concept along with preliminary funding parameters. No strings, no obligation. Look it over. Talk to people you trust. Decide if it's something worth exploring. Jack didn't touch the drive. And if I say no, then I find another approach. Victoria's smile held a hint of sadness. But I hope you won't. Your community needs something like this, and frankly, my industry needs people like you to remind us what technology is supposed to be for. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Lily's voice calling from outside. Jack looked through the window to see his daughter racing across the yard, Ellen following at a more sedate pace. I should go. Victoria gathered her bag, moving toward the door. The flash drive is yours either way. Please consider it, Mr. Harmon. I think we could build something meaningful together. As she stepped outside, Lily skidded to a stop in front of her, looking up with the direct gaze that Jack recognized as her information-gathering expression. Are you the lady from the cafe? The one Daddy helped Victoria knelt to meet Lily at eye level, her corporate demeanor softening instantly. Yes, I am. Your daddy and the whole community helped me when I really needed it. Lily nodded solemnly, processing this confirmation. Are you still in trouble? The directness of the question seemed to catch Victoria off guard. Not the immediate kind of trouble from last night. But I'm working on some big problems that might take longer to solve. Maybe Daddy can help. He's really good at fixing things. Lily's confidence in her father's abilities was absolute. He says sometimes you have to take everything apart to find what's broken. Victoria glanced up at Jack, something unreadable flickering across her face. That's very wise, Lily. I think your daddy might indeed be able to help with exactly that kind of problem. After Victoria departed in a sleek black SUV, Jack sat with Lily and Ellen on the workshop porch, turning the flash drive over in his hand, while considering the strange turn his life had taken in less than 24 hours. She wants you to build something with her. Ellen's skepticism was evident. The woman's a billionaire tech CEO, Jack. What could she possibly need from a small-town carpenter? Jack explained Victoria's community center concept, watching Ellen's expression shift from skepticism to cautious interest. The idea had merit, particularly for a town still reeling from economic decline. But the timing and circumstances raise obvious concerns. Sounds too good to be true. Ellen frowned. And in my experience, things that sound too good to be true usually are. Lily, who had been listening with intense concentration, looked up from the small block of wood she was sanding. But she needed help, and we helped her. Now she wants to help others. Isn't that how it's supposed to work? The simplicity of Lily's reasoning gave Jack pause. In her 6-year-old worldview, the progression made perfect sense. Help received should lead to help given. The adult complications, corporate motives, potential dangers, complicated partnerships didn't factor into her assessment. Jack ruffled her hair gently. Sometimes it's more complicated than that, squirt. Why? Lily's genuine confusion cut through his adult rationalizations. If someone needs help and you can help them, you should. If you can make something good, you should make it. Ellen chuckled softly, out of the mouths of babes. You know, Jack, she might have a point. Maybe you're overthinking this. Or maybe I'm being appropriately cautious about getting involved with a woman who had armed men hunting her yesterday. Jack slipped the flash drive into his pocket. I need to talk to Mike, maybe get his take on this. Mike's assessment came later that afternoon, delivered over beers on Jack's back porch, while Lily played within sight in the yard. The mechanic listened to the full story, whistling low, when Jack described the surveillance technology Victoria was trying to prevent from reaching the market. So you're telling me this woman is taking on corporate corruption, federal investigations, and armed goons, and she still has time to propose community development projects in Riverdale? Mike took a long pull from his beer. Either she's the most impressive person on the planet, or there's something you're not seeing. Jack stared out at Lily, who was carefully arranging small stones in mysterious patterns only she understood. That's what I keep trying to figure out. What angle am I missing? Maybe there isn't one. Mike shrugged. Maybe she's exactly what she appears to be, someone who built a company with good intentions, discovered corruption, and is now trying to get back to her original mission. His expression turned serious. But Jack, if you do this, you need to understand what you're walking into. These people were willing to send armed men after her. They won't hesitate to come after anyone who helps her rebuild. The warning lingered in Jack's mind as he tucked Lily into bed that night. His daughter's room was a haven of childhood innocence. Walls painted soft blue with clouds, bookshelves filled with stories of adventure and kindness, the small workbench in the corner where she practiced her own beginning carpentry skills. Creating this safe space had been his mission since Rebecca's death. Was he willing to risk it by aligning himself with Victoria's complicated battle? "Daddy, are you going to help the lady make the special place?" Lily asked as he finished their nightly reading ritual. Jack hesitated, unwilling to make promises he might not keep. "I'm thinking about it, Squirt. It's a big decision." Lily's expression turned serious, her small brow furrowing in concentration. "Remember when you showed me how to sand wood? You said sometimes you have to go against the grain to make things smooth in the end." Jack smiled despite his concerns. "I did say that, didn't I?" She nodded earnestly. "I think this is a going against the grain time." The wisdom in her observation was startling. Once again, Lily had distilled a complex situation to its essence, seeing through adult complications to the core truth. Sometimes progress required moving against resistance, working through the difficult patches to reach something better on the other side. Jack kissed her forehead gently. "When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, Daddy." Lily's matter-of-fact response made him laugh. "You just forgot to notice sometimes." After Lily fell asleep, Jack sat at his kitchen table and finally plugged the flash drive into his laptop. The contents were exactly as Victoria had described, detailed plans for a community technology center that would combine traditional craftsmanship with cutting-edge digital tools. The funding model was generous but not extravagant, designed for sustainability rather than flashy short-term impact. What surprised him most was how closely the vision aligned with concerns he'd expressed to Ellen and others about Riverdale's future. The proposal addressed the exact issues that kept him awake at night: young people leaving for opportunities elsewhere, older workers with valuable skills being left behind by technological change, small businesses struggling to compete in an increasingly digital marketplace. As dawn broke, Jack reached his decision. He would move forward with Victoria's proposal, but with conditions of his own. If they were going to build this center, it would be a genuine partnership, not a corporate vanity project. And he would ensure that Riverdale's needs remained the priority regardless of whatever larger game Victoria might be playing in her corporate world. The former steel mill stood as a rusting monument to Riverdale's industrial past. Massive brick walls housed cavernous spaces where molten metal had once flowed and workers had labored in round-the-clock shifts. Nature had begun to reclaim portions of the site. Vines crawled up walls, small trees pushed through cracks in the concrete floors, pigeons nested in the rafters of collapsed sections. Jack walked the perimeter with Victoria 3 days later, both of them silently assessing the challenges and possibilities. The property had been abandoned for nearly a decade, the owners maintaining minimal security while hoping for a buyer who never materialized. "My father worked here for 30 years. Jack broke the silence as they stood in what had once been the main production floor. Started as a teenager, sweeping floors, worked his way up to foreman by the time I was born. The day they announced the closure was the only time I ever saw him cry." Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "What happened to the workers?" "Some retired early. Some found jobs elsewhere and commuted. Others moved away entirely. Jack gestured toward the town visible through broken windows. Riverdale lost about a third of its population over the next 5 years. Those who stayed watched property values collapse and businesses close one by one. And yet you stayed. Victoria's observation wasn't a question, but Jack answered anyway. This is home. My family's been here for 4 generations. Besides, someone needs to remember what this place was, what these people built together. He ran his hand along a massive support beam, feeling the industrial history beneath his fingers. If we forget, if we just abandon everything and chase the next opportunity somewhere else, what does that say about what matters? Victoria nodded slowly, turning to survey the entire space. And now you're considering transforming this place into something new. Does that feel like betrayal or continuation? The question cut to the heart of Jack's ambivalence about the project. Both, in a way. I don't want to erase what this was, but letting it rot doesn't honor anyone's memory either. Victoria moved toward a shaft of sunlight cutting through a hole in the ceiling, dust motes dancing in the beam. Then we make that tension part of the design. Not erasing history, but building on it. Not replacing craft with technology, but finding ways for them to strengthen each other. For the first time, Jack felt genuine alignment with her vision. That's exactly what this place needs to be. A bridge between what Riverdale was and what it could become. They spent the next hour walking through the massive structure, identifying spaces for workshops, classrooms, small business incubation areas, and community gathering spaces. Despite the deterioration, the building's bones remain sound high ceilings, excellent, natural light, and the solid construction of an era when industrial architecture was built to last generations. As they finished their tour, Victoria pulled out her phone and made a brief call. The property is perfect. Proceed with the acquisition immediately, full, asking price, expedited closing. Jack raised an eyebrow at the casual display of financial power. Just like that. No negotiations, no inspection period. Victoria slipped her phone back into her pocket. Time matters more than money right now. And besides, the inspection is happening as we speak. She gestured toward a drone hovering high above the building, systematically photographing every aspect of the structure. The full engineering assessment will be on my desk tomorrow morning. The efficiency was impressive but unsettling. Jack was accustomed to projects that developed at human-paced discussions, planning careful consideration before each step. Victoria operated at an entirely different tempo, making decisions and deploying resources with breathtaking speed. This partnership is going to work only if we find a middle ground between your world and mine. Jack's voice was firm. I understand the need for quick action, but this community needs to be genuinely involved, not just informed after decisions are made. Victoria studied him for a moment, then nodded. You're right, I'm used to operating unilaterally. It's efficient, but it's not always effective, especially for a project like this. She extended her hand. Partners then, with all the messiness and compromise that entails. As they shook hands, Jack felt the weight of what he was committing to not just a building project, but a fundamental reimagining of what Riverdale could become. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential. Later that evening, Jack convened an informal community meeting at Miller's Cafe. Ellen had spread the word through her network, and by 7 o'clock the cafe was packed with a cross-section of Riverdale's residents. Teachers, small business owners, retired mill workers, and young people curious about potential opportunities. Jack stood before them, uncomfortable with public speaking, but determined to ensure the community understood what was being proposed. Victoria stood slightly apart, deliberately positioning herself as an observer, rather than the driving force. So that's the basic concept, Jack concluded after outlining the Community Technology Center plan, a place that honors our traditions and skills while creating new opportunities. A bridge between what Riverdale has always been and what it could become. The questions came rapidly, ranging from practical concerns about jobs and training to deeper worries about outside influence and changing community character. Jack answered each one directly, neither overselling the benefits nor minimizing the challenges. An older man in the back, his face weathered by decades in the mill, raised his hand. We've heard promises before. Big companies come in, talk about investment and opportunity, then pull out when their tax breaks expire or their priorities change. What makes this different? Jack looked to Victoria, who stepped forward to address the question. That's entirely fair skepticism. The difference is that this isn't a branch operation or a satellite facility. It's a flagship model for a new approach to technology development. If it succeeds here, it becomes a template that could transform how tech companies engage with communities nationwide. She outlined the governance structure she and Jack had begun developing: a community board with real authority, transparent finances, training programs designed for long-term stability rather than quick metrics. Most importantly, she emphasized that once established, the center would operate as an independent entity, not a corporate subsidiary. As the meeting progressed, Jack watched the community's reaction shift from skepticism to cautious interest. Victoria fielded technical questions with impressive clarity, avoiding jargon and connecting each answer to practical implications for Riverdale. When she didn't know something, she admitted it plainly rather than offering empty reassurances. By the meeting's end, a tentative consensus had emerged. The project had merit and deserved exploration, though many details remained to be worked out. A smaller working group volunteered to help develop specific aspects of the plan: educational components, small business support, preservation of the building's historical elements. As the cafe emptied, Ellen approached Jack, her expression a mix of concern and hope. "You know what you're getting yourself into. This isn't just a building project anymore. You're positioning yourself as a community leader." Jack watched as Victoria spoke quietly with Dr. Wilson about healthcare technology applications. Not by choice, but someone needs to make sure this happens on Riverdale's terms, not just Reynolds Technologies' terms. Ellen squeezed his arm gently. "Your father would be proud, Jack. He always said you had vision beyond your tools." The comment struck an unexpectedly emotional chord. Jack's father had died 2 years before Rebecca, never meeting Lily or seeing how Jack had rebuilt his life after military service. The thought that this project might honor his father's memory added yet another dimension to his commitment. As the last community members departed, Victoria joined Jack and Ellen at their corner booth. "Thank you both. That was extraordinarily helpful. In my world, community engagement usually means carefully orchestrated focus groups and PR events, not real conversations with people who ask uncomfortable questions." Ellen studied Victoria with the frank assessment of someone who had spent decades reading people across a cafe counter. "You did well. You listened more than you spoke. That matters around here." Victoria accepted the judgment with a nod. "I have a lot to learn about how communities like this actually function. My experience tends toward the theoretical rather than the practical." The admission of limitation was disarmingly honest from someone of her stature. Jack found himself warming to this more vulnerable version of the tech CEO, someone willing to acknowledge the boundaries of her expertise rather than assuming her success in one domain translated to authority in all others. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Jack's phone ringing, Mike's number flashing on the screen. Jack stepped away to take the call, but returned moments later, his expression grim. "Someone broke into my workshop. Mike went by to drop off some supplies and found the door forced open." Victoria immediately tensed. "Was anything taken? I don't know yet. But Mike says it doesn't look like an ordinary break-in. Things were searched rather than stolen, drawers emptied, projects moved around." Jack's mind immediately went to Lily safely at a sleepover with her friend Emma, but the violation of his workspace felt deeply personal. "I'm coming with you." Victoria gathered her things with efficient movements. "This isn't coincidence, and you shouldn't face it alone." The drive to Jack's property took only minutes, but when they arrived, the scene confirmed their worst fears. The workshop had been methodically searched, tools and materials disturbed, but largely left in place. This wasn't a random theft or vandalism. It was a message. Mike met them at the door, his expression tense. "I've checked the house too. Same thing, someone went through your office, but nothing obvious is missing. I called Sheriff Parker, but he's handling an accident on the highway. Deputies on the way." Jack moved through the workshop, cataloging the invasion with growing anger. Each project had been examined, some partially disassembled. His design notebooks had been rifled through, pages bent back. But the most disturbing discovery came when he reached Lily's small workbench in the corner. Her projects remained untouched, but placed prominently in the center was a drawing she had made weeks ago, a picture of herself and Jack in front of their house. The drawing had been on their refrigerator that morning. Someone had taken it from inside his home and deliberately placed it here as a message. Victoria crossed the workshop to stand beside him, her expression hardening as she understood the implication. "This is Brooks. It's his standard intimidation tactic demonstrating access to what you value most. The cold calculation of the threat, the careful removal of the drawing from his home, the deliberate placement in the workshop filled Jack with a rage he hadn't felt since his military days. These people had entered his home, touched his daughter's artwork, used her very existence as leverage. This changes things. His voice was tight with controlled fury. They've brought Lily into this. That crosses a line. Victoria's face had gone pale, her composure cracking slightly. I never intended for your family to be targeted. If you want to step away from the project, I completely understand. Jack looked down at the drawing, then back at Victoria with newfound resolve. Stepping away doesn't solve this. They know I helped you at the cafe. They know Lily was there too. The only way forward is through. Mike approached cautiously, aware of the tension crackling between them. What exactly are we dealing with here, Ms. Reynolds? Because this feels like something way beyond corporate rivalry. Victoria's expression became grimmer. It started as corporate espionage, but it's evolved into something more dangerous. The surveillance technology Brooks wants to bring to market has serious national security implications. There are foreign interests involved, people who see enormous profit potential in unrestricted surveillance capabilities. The stakes were escalating far beyond what Jack had initially understood. This wasn't just about a community center anymore, or even about corporate ethics. It was about technology with the potential for widespread harm controlled by people willing to threaten a child to protect their interests. The deputy arrived shortly afterward, taking statements and photographs while promising increased patrols. But Jack harbored no illusions about local law enforcement's ability to protect them from the forces Victoria had described. This threat operated on a different scale entirely. After the deputy departed, the three of them gathered on the workshop porch, the evening darkness settling around them like a physical weight. Victoria broke the silence first, her voice quiet but determined. I have resources that can help. Security personnel, protective measures. We can ensure Lily's safety while we address the larger threat. Jack shook his head firmly. No private security around my daughter. That would terrify her, change her entire sense of safety in her own home and community. What about sending her to stay with relatives for a while, Mike suggested cautiously. Just until this situation is resolved. Again, Jack refused. Lily already lost her mother. I won't separate her from her home and routine unless it's absolutely necessary. His mind was already formulating alternatives. But I will accept security for the mill site and possibly surveillance systems here that don't involve armed guards scaring my daughter. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. We'll find solutions that protect without disrupting. Her expression shifted to one of genuine regret. I'm so sorry to have brought this into your life, Jack. This was exactly what I was trying to prevent by developing the community center concept technology used to connect and empower, not to threaten and control. The irony wasn't lost on Jack. The very project intended to demonstrate technology's positive potential had instead brought technology's darkest applications directly to his doorstep. But retreating now would mean surrendering to those who viewed power as an end in itself, who saw communities and individuals as resources to be exploited rather than people to be served. When someone tries to intimidate you into abandoning what's right, it's usually a sign you're heading in exactly the direction they fear most. Jack's voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had faced threats before and refused to be moved. We continue with the project, but we also prepare for whatever comes next. The words hung in the night air, a declaration of intent that would shape everything that followed. What had begun as a partnership to build something positive had transformed into a battle against forces that viewed such collaboration as a threat to their power. The lines were drawn and retreat was no longer an option. As Victoria departed with promises of security measures and legal responses, Jack and Mike remained on the porch, the weight of the situation settling between them like a physical presence. You sure about this? Mike's concern was evident. These people aren't playing small-town games. They've got resources, connections, and apparently no moral boundaries. Jack gazed toward the house where he'd raised Lily, built a life from the pieces left after Rebecca's death, created a haven of safety and possibility. I'm not backing down just because the fight got harder. If we do that, if we let threats drive our choices, what lesson does that teach Lily? The same one you taught her at the cafe. Mike's voice held a mixture of admiration and worry. That standing up for what's right matters even when it's dangerous. I just hope the price isn't too high this time. Jack didn't answer immediately. The truth was he had no certainty about what would come next or whether he could truly protect everything he valued. But he knew with absolute clarity that surrendering to intimidation would cost something even more precious than safety. It would cost the very values he had built his life around, the principles he was trying to instill in his daughter. Some lines have to be held, whatever the cost. His voice was quiet but firm. Otherwise, what are we even protecting? As the night deepened around them, Jack made a silent promise to Lily, to Riverdale, and to himself. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on with the same steady determination that guided his hands when shaping raw wood into objects of lasting beauty and purpose. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but it would be true. The first bulldozer rolled through the chain-link fence surrounding the abandoned steel mill on a crisp October morning. Jack stood beside Victoria, watching as decades of neglect began to give way to possibility. Riverdale's residents lined the perimeter, some wearing hard hats from their millworking days, others holding children on their shoulders to witness the transformation beginning. The moment carried both solemnity and celebration, an acknowledgement of what had been lost alongside hope for what might be built from the ruins. 3 weeks had passed since the break-in at Jack's workshop. The immediate aftermath had brought practical changes. Discreet security cameras installed around his property, FBI agents maintaining occasional surveillance, and a careful explanation to Lily about people who didn't like the community center idea, who might try to cause problems. Jack had been determined to protect her sense of safety without lying about the potential danger. Victoria approached the practical challenge of security with the same intensity she brought to technological innovation. The mill site itself was now guarded around the clock, with construction crews carefully vetted. Digital security was even more rigorous. All planning documents and communications were routed through encrypted channels with regular sweeps for surveillance devices. Yet for all the precautions, the project moved forward with surprising speed. Victoria's resources and connections had expedited permits that normally took months to secure. Engineers and architects worked alongside local contractors, preserving the mill's industrial character while reimagining its purpose. The foundation of a genuine partnership between technology and craftsmanship was taking physical form in brick, steel, and glass. Sheriff Parker approached as the demolition crews began clearing debris from the mill's easternmost section. Word around town is that there's more to this project than just community development. His expression carried the friendly concern of someone who had known Jack since childhood. People are saying this Reynolds woman brought trouble with her. Jack watched as Victoria consulted with the lead architect, her focus intense as she discussed structural reinforcements for the old crane system they planned to preserve as a central feature. There's always resistance to change, Sheriff, especially in a town that's seen more broken promises than kept ones. That's not what I mean, and you know it. The sheriff's voice lowered. 2 men checked into the Riverdale Inn 3 days ago. Expensive suits, rental car with Pittsburgh plates, asking casual questions about you and the mill project. My deputy ran the plates. Car was rented, using an ID that doesn't exist in any database we can access. The information wasn't surprising, but the timing was concerning. The public announcement of the community center's official launch was scheduled for the following week. A town square event designed to fully introduce the concept to Riverdale and surrounding communities, complete with demonstrations of the technologies that would be available and testimonials from local business owners about potential benefits. I appreciate the heads up. Jack kept his voice casual despite the tightening in his chest. We've taken precautions. Just be careful, Jack. Sheriff Parker's concern was genuine. This town's already lost too much. We can't afford to lose you too. The warning lingered as Jack crossed the construction site to where Victoria stood examining blueprints spread across a makeshift table. She glanced up at his approach, immediately reading the tension in his expression. Problem: possible surveillance. 2 men at the Riverdale Inn asking questions. Jack kept his voice low despite the construction noise around them. They're getting positioning before the announcement event. Victoria's posture shifted subtly, the CEO replacing the architect. The timing makes sense. Brooks knows we're going public with the community center concept. He's likely gathering intelligence for his next move, which will be what exactly? Jack's frustration bubbled to the surface. We're building a community technology center, not launching a military operation. What exactly does he think he's preventing? Victoria's gaze swept across the construction site, taking in the activity with a strategist's assessment. It's not about this specific building, Jack. It's about the model it represents. If this succeeds, if we demonstrate that technology companies can genuinely empower communities rather than just extract value from them, it threatens the entire paradigm Brooks is invested in. The underlying conflict came into sharper focus. This wasn't merely corporate infighting or even a dispute about surveillance technology. It was a fundamental clash of visions about technology's role in society as a tool for human flourishing or as a mechanism for control and profit extraction, regardless of human cost. We need to accelerate the timeline. Victoria's decision was immediate and characteristically decisive. Move the public announcement up 3 days. Give them less time to prepare whatever they're planning. Jack shook his head firmly. No, we're not playing their game of action and reaction. This is Riverdale's project as much as it's yours or mine. We stick to the original schedule and take whatever precautions are necessary. The pushback visibly surprised Victoria. She wasn't accustomed to having her tactical decisions questioned, particularly not by someone outside her corporate hierarchy. But after a moment's consideration, she nodded slowly. You're right. Reactive decisions based on fear are exactly what Brooks wants. His preferred battlefield is panic and intimidation. We win by staying steady, transparent, and community-focused. The exchange highlighted the evolving nature of their partnership. Victoria brought resources, vision, and strategic thinking to the table. Jack contributed practical judgment, community understanding, and moral clarity. When these elements aligned, the resulting decisions were stronger than either could have achieved alone. As evening approached, Jack found himself drawn to the small alcove where his father's old locker still stood, among dozens of others preserved as a memorial to the workers who had once filled this space with life and purpose. He ran his fingers over the faded nameplate, Robert Harmon Shift Foreman, remembering childhood visits when his father would lift him up to peer into the mysterious adult world of industrial production. Victoria found him there, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space now emptied of construction crews for the day. She stood quietly beside him, respecting the personal moment before speaking. Your father worked here, Jack nodded, his throat unexpectedly tight with emotion. 32 years. Started when he was 16, worked his way up from sweeping floors to running the whole second shift. Used to bring me here on special days, show me off to his crew. I thought he was some kind of industrial king, the way people listened when he spoke. Victoria studied the locker, then the man beside it, making connections. That's why this matters so much to you. It's not just about economic opportunity or even community development. It's about honoring their work by building something worthy on the foundation they created. Jack hadn't articulated it so clearly even to himself, but Victoria's assessment struck true. This wasn't just a building project or even a community revitalization effort. It was a statement about continuity and respect, acknowledging that what came before had value that deserved to be preserved even as new forms emerged. They built things that lasted. Jack's voice carried both pride and melancholy. Not just the products that came out of this mill, but the community around it. Families that stayed for generations, neighbors who looked out for each other. When the mill closed, we lost more than just jobs. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the history and emotion embedded in the space around them. When she finally spoke, her voice carried unusual vulnerability. I built my company to create technology that connects people. Somewhere along the way, that vision got corrupted by market pressures, by growth imperatives, by people like Brooks, who see human needs as exploitable opportunities rather than responsibilities to address. The admission revealed something essential about her motivation, not just to prevent the misuse of surveillance technology, but to reclaim the original purpose that had driven her to build Reynolds Technologies in the first place. The community center wasn't merely a strategic project, it was an attempt to course-correct her life's work. Their shared moment of reflection was interrupted by Jack's phone buzzing with a text from Mike. Need to talk, found something, coming to your place in 30. 20 minutes later, they sat at Jack's kitchen table while Mike explained his discovery. The mechanic had been doing routine maintenance on a town council member's car when he noticed an unusual device attached beneath the dashboard, a sophisticated tracking module with audio recording capabilities. I recognized the design from my Army days. Mike's expression was grim. It's high-end surveillance gear, not the kind of thing you'd find in a consumer spy shop. So I started checking other vehicles, people connected to the project, folks who've been vocal about supporting it. Found three more so far. Jack's stomach tightened with the implications. They're monitoring the entire community network, tracking who meets with whom, recording conversations, building a map of support and opposition. Victoria's response was measured but intense, the tech CEO evaluating a security breach. That level of surveillance technology suggests resources beyond what Brooks could access through normal channels. He must have outside backing, possibly the same foreign interests interested in the surveillance software. The scale of what they were facing expanded yet again. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. It was coordinated information warfare against an entire community aimed at undermining the social trust necessary for the project to succeed. Mike pulled a small device from his pocket and placed it on the table, one of the trackers he'd removed. I could dismantle the others, but they'd just replace them with something we might not detect as easily. Might be better to feed them selected information, let them think their surveillance is working. Victoria nodded approvingly. Good thinking. We can use their own tactics against them, let them hear conversations that suggest divisions or concerns about the project that don't actually exist. Create uncertainty about who supports us and how committed that support really is. Jack recognized the strategic thinking in their approach, but felt uneasy about adopting deceptive tactics even defensively. I'm not comfortable manipulating people, even our opponents. There has to be a way to counter this that doesn't compromise our own principles. Victoria studied him with newfound respect. That's exactly the difference between your approach and Brooks. He sees manipulation as a first resort. You see it as a last resort. Her expression softened slightly, but we still need to protect vulnerable community members from this kind of invasion. They developed a compromise approach, informing key community supporters about the surveillance so they could protect sensitive conversations while allowing non-sensitive interactions to proceed normally. The strategy would provide some protection without descending into the same deceptive tactics their opponents employed. As Mike departed with plans to alert their closest allies, Victoria lingered at the kitchen table, her gaze drifting to where Lily's artwork covered the refrigerator door. Colorful drawings of houses, animals, and imaginative landscapes populated by tiny figures holding hands. How is she handling all of this? Victoria's question carried genuine concern. Children sense tension even when adults try to hide it. Jack thought of the subtle changes in Lily's behavior over the past weeks. Her increased reluctance to play in the yard alone, the way she sometimes checked window locks before bedtime, her more frequent questions about when the people who don't like the community center would go away. She's resilient, but she's not untouched by it. I try to be honest without frightening her, to explain that sometimes doing important things means facing opposition. Victoria nodded slowly, her expression troubled. I never intended to bring this kind of disruption into your lives. If I had known how Brooks would escalate, I might have chosen a different approach. Jack recognized the guilt in her voice, the second-guessing that came with leadership decisions affecting others' well-being. Don't do that. Don't question the choice to stand up against what Brooks represents. That's exactly what he wants, for good people to decide the cost of opposition is too high. Their eyes met across the table, a moment of connection that transcended their professional partnership. In the weeks of working together, they had developed a mutual respect that was evolving into something more complex, not just appreciation for each other's capabilities, but a deeper recognition of shared values expressed through different approaches. The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car door slamming outside. Jack moved quickly to the window, then relaxed when he saw Ellen helping Lily from her car. The regular Tuesday dinner at Miller's Cafe had become an extended play date at Ellen's apartment above the cafe, a small adjustment to their routine designed to maintain normalcy while keeping Lily in trusted company. Victoria gathered her things, understanding the need for family privacy. I should go. We have a big day tomorrow. The engineering team is finalizing the technology integration plans for the East Wing. As she headed for the door, Lily burst in with the exuberant energy of a 6-year-old with news to share. Her trajectory halted momentarily when she spotted Victoria, then resumed with even greater enthusiasm. Ms. Victoria, I made something for the special building. Her small hands thrust a folded paper toward the CEO. It's a map for the ideas corner, so people know where to put different kinds of ideas. Victoria knelt to examine the drawing, her corporate demeanor dissolving into genuine interest. Lily had created an elaborate floor plan of a space with different areas labeled in careful printing: building ideas, computer ideas, helping people ideas, and in the center, a space labeled ideas that don't fit anywhere else yet. This is absolutely brilliant, Lily. Victoria studied the design with the serious attention she might give an engineer's schematics. You've thought of something very important that adults often forget: we need spaces for ideas that don't fit into our existing categories. Lily beamed at the validation. That's the most important part. Daddy says sometimes the best ideas are the ones that seem strange at first. Victoria glanced up at Jack with newfound appreciation. Your daddy is very wise. I think we should incorporate your design into our actual plans. Would you be willing to work with our architects as a special consultant? The offer delighted Lily, who immediately launched into additional ideas for the space, while Ellen watched with amused approval from the doorway. Jack observed the interaction with complex emotions: pride in his daughter's creativity, gratification at Victoria's genuine respect for her ideas, and an undercurrent of worry about the forces arrayed against the project that had sparked this unexpected connection. After good nights were exchanged and Lily was settled with Ellen in the kitchen to prepare dinner, Jack walked Victoria to her car. The evening had turned cool, with stars emerging in the clear autumn sky above Riverdale's modest skyline. Thank you for taking her ideas seriously. Jack's gratitude was genuine. Children can tell when adults are just humoring them. Victoria's response carried unusual emotion. Her design was legitimately insightful. That central space for ideas that don't fit anywhere else yet, that's precisely what innovation requires. Space for the unexpected, the unconventional, the not yet categorizable. She paused, looking back toward the house. She has an extraordinary mind, Jack. Creative, but also deeply practical. Pride mingled with the ever-present concern for Lily's future. I worry sometimes about raising her here. Riverdale doesn't have the educational opportunities or cultural resources of larger cities, but it gives her something else: a sense of belonging, of being part of something with roots and meaning. Victoria considered this with thoughtful attention. That trade-off between opportunity breadth and community depth is exactly what the center is trying to address. Technology can bring world-class resources to small communities, but it can't create the sense of belonging and continuity that places like Riverdale provide naturally. Her insight crystallized something Jack had been feeling, but struggling to articulate: the unique value proposition of their entire project. Not just economic revitalization or technological access, but a genuine synthesis that preserved what was most valuable about community life while expanding opportunity horizons. As Victoria opened her car door, Jack found himself reluctant to end the conversation. The evening had shifted something in their relationship, moving it beyond professional collaboration into the territory of genuine connection. Will you be at the site tomorrow? His question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Victoria seemed to understand the subtext. All day. There's still so much to coordinate before the public announcement. She hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic uncertainty, perhaps we could have dinner afterward to discuss next steps. The invitation hung between them both, clearly aware that discussing next steps wasn't the only motivation. Jack nodded, accepting both the stated reason and the unstated possibility. I'd like that. Ellen can watch Lily. They're planning some kind of secret baking project anyway. As Victoria's car disappeared down the quiet street, Jack stood in the driveway longer than necessary, processing the unexpected turn their partnership had taken. What had begun as a pragmatic alliance was evolving into something neither had anticipated: a connection based not just on shared goals but on mutual recognition of values expressed through different approaches to the world. The morning of the public announcement dawned with the crisp clarity of mid-autumn. Market Square, the heart of Riverdale's small downtown district, had been transformed overnight. A temporary stage stood before the century-old courthouse. Display booths showcased the technology and training programs that would be available at the community center. Large screens displayed architectural renderings of the renovated mill alongside historical photographs of the building in its industrial prime. Jack arrived early, watching as Victoria directed final preparations with characteristic precision. She moved among technicians and presenters with focused energy, checking details and making last-minute adjustments to ensure everything communicated exactly the right message. Her corporate armor was firmly in place, tailored blazer, confident posture, authoritative gestures, but Jack had begun to recognize it as just one facet of a more complex person rather than her entire identity. The square gradually filled with townspeople. Mill retirees in their work jackets clustered near displays about the building's history. Young parents guided curious children through interactive technology demonstrations. Small business owners studied economic development plans with cautious optimism. The atmosphere carried a tentative hope that Jack hadn't felt in Riverdale for years. Sheriff Parker approached as Jack was reviewing his speaking notes. Thought you should know those two men from the inn are here. Front row left side of the stage. Blue suit and gray suit. Jack spotted them immediately, corporate foot soldiers with neutral expressions and watchful eyes. Their presence was expected, but still unsettling, a reminder that forces beyond Riverdale were monitoring every development with calculated interest. Victoria joined them instantly, alert to the tension in Jack's posture. Problem Sheriff Parker nodded toward the two men. We've got company, corporate types probably reporting directly back to Brooks. Victoria's expression hardened momentarily before she recovered her public face. Good. Let them see exactly what we're building and the community's support behind it. That's the whole point of today, to make this too public, too positive, and too popular to attack directly. Her confidence was strategic rather than naive. The public nature of the event created a form of protection. Any overt interference would only validate the project's importance and generate unwanted attention to Brooks's activities. Today's announcement would move their work from private development into the public sphere, creating accountability that would make covert opposition more difficult. As the scheduled start time approached, Jack felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just a construction announcement or technology demonstration. It was a declaration of intent, a community claiming its right to shape its own future by combining the best of its traditions with new possibilities. Mike appeared at his side, scanning the growing crowd with the practiced vigilance of someone who had seen combat. Sheriff's got deputies positioned around the perimeter. FBI has 2 agents in plain clothes near the back. We're as secure as we're going to get. Jack nodded gratefully. Have you seen anyone else suspicious besides our front row friends? Mike's expression tightened. Nothing obvious? But Brooks wouldn't send his obvious people unless he wanted us to see them. Keep your eyes open for the ones we're not supposed to notice. The warning settled like a cold weight in Jack's stomach as he took his place on the stage alongside Victoria and key community supporters. Ellen representing local businesses, Dr. Wilson speaking to healthcare applications, Pastor Thompson addressing educational opportunities for underserved populations. The faces looking back at them represented generations of Riverdale history people who had weathered economic collapse, population decline, and diminishing opportunities without abandoning their community. Victoria opened the presentation with practiced skill, outlining the vision for what they were now officially calling the Riverdale Innovation Center. Her corporate polish was tempered with genuine respect for the community's history, acknowledging the significance of repurposing a site that had once been the town's economic heart. When she introduced Jack, the transition from corporate presentation to community voice was immediately apparent. Jack spoke without notes, his carpenter's hands occasionally emphasizing points with the same precise movements he used when explaining woodworking techniques. This isn't about replacing what Riverdale has always been. It's about building on the foundation our parents and grandparents created. His voice carried the quiet authority that had come to characterize his leadership role. They built this community through skilled work and commitment to quality that outlasts any single generation. The Innovation Center continues that tradition, not by mimicking the past, but by honoring its core values while creating new opportunities. As he spoke, Jack noticed movement at the back of the crowd. A group of men in business attire had arrived late, positioning themselves strategically around the perimeter. They weren't behaving like interested community members. No interaction with displays, no engagement with neighbors, just watchful observation and occasional murmured communications into discreet devices. Without interrupting his presentation, Jack made eye contact with Sheriff Parker, who had also noticed the newcomers and was already dispatching deputies to monitor them more closely. Victoria, attuned to Jack's subtle shift in attention, followed his gaze and immediately understood the potential threat. Her posture tensed, but her public demeanor remained controlled as she prepared to return to the stage. Jack concluded his remarks by inviting community members to explore the displays and speak directly with project team members about specific aspects of the center. The formal presentation transitioned into a more interactive phase with presenters stationed at information booths to answer questions and demonstrate technologies. As Victoria rejoined him at the edge of the stage, Jack kept his voice low. "We've got company, at least 6 men, possibly more, positioned around the perimeter. I've counted 8. Victoria's response was equally quiet. Too many for coincidence, too coordinated for casual observation. Her assessment was professionally detached despite the personal danger. "This is a show of force, not an attack. Brooks wants us to know he can mobilize resources, quickly deploy them in public settings without obvious threat." The psychological warfare aspect was clear, demonstrating capability without taking direct action, creating anxiety and uncertainty without crossing legal boundaries. It was a sophisticated intimidation tactic designed to undermine the very sense of safety and possibility they were trying to build. Jack made a decision, his voice firm, despite the concern tightening his chest. "We don't react. We continue exactly as planned. Engaging with their intimidation tactics only legitimizes them." Victoria nodded agreement, but her eyes continued tracking the watchers with the alertness of someone who understood the threat wasn't merely psychological. Together, they moved into the crowd, separating to engage with different groups while maintaining awareness of each other's positions and the locations of Brooks' observers. The next hour unfolded in a strange dual reality. The surface level of enthusiastic community engagement with the Innovation Center concept and the undercurrent of tension as the observers maintained their watchful presence without direct interference. Sheriff Parker's deputies and the FBI agents created a subtle protective network, positioning themselves to respond if observations shifted to action. Jack was explaining the center's mentorship program to a group of high school students when he noticed one of the observers approaching Victoria as she stood near the architectural display. The man's posture wasn't overtly threatening, but something in his purposeful movement triggered Jack's protective instincts. He excused himself from the students and moved quickly but calmly toward Victoria, reaching her, just as the man extended what appeared to be a business card. Victoria's expression remained professionally neutral, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders as she accepted the card without examining it. "Ms. Reynolds," the man's voice carried practiced courtesy masking something harder. "Mr. Brooks sends his congratulations on your community initiative. He's looking forward to discussing its implications at next month's board meeting." The implied threat was clear. Brooks maintained power at Reynolds Technologies and intended to challenge Victoria's leadership based on her actions in Riverdale. It was a corporate chess move delivered in person for maximum psychological impact. Before Victoria could respond, Jack stepped forward, deliberately casual but physically present. Problem here, his question was directed at Victoria rather than the messenger, a subtle rejection of the man's authority in this setting. "Not at all." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "This gentleman was just leaving." The messenger's gaze shifted to Jack, assessing him with cold calculation before nodding slightly. "Of course," merely delivering a courtesy message. He turned away, moving back to his position at the perimeter without haste or apparent concern. Once he was out of earshot, Victoria finally looked at the card in her hand. It wasn't a business card at all, but a photograph, an image of Jack's house taken that morning with Lily visible through the kitchen window as Ellen helped her prepare breakfast. The violation was profound, the implied threat unmistakable. Jack's world narrowed to the photograph and what it represented. These people had been watching his daughter, photographing her in what should have been the safety of their home. The rage that surged through him was primal. A father's instinct to protect transformed into something dangerous and immediate. Victoria's hand on his arm anchored him to rationality. "Don't." That's exactly what they want, to provoke a public reaction, to turn this positive community event into a confrontation that undermines everything we're building. Her logic penetrated the rage but didn't dissolve it. "They're watching my daughter Victoria. In our home, they crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." "I know." Victoria's voice carried equal parts compassion and strategic focus. "And we will respond, but on our terms, not theirs. Right now, we complete this event successfully. We show this community what's possible when people work together instead of surrendering to intimidation." The discipline in her approach helped Jack regain his center. She was right, reacting from rage would only serve Brooks's interests, transforming their public announcement from a demonstration of positive potential into evidence that the project generated conflict and disruption. With supreme effort, Jack forced the protective father back beneath the surface, allowing the community leader to continue the public event. But the photograph had changed something fundamental in his assessment of their situation. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering or even unethical business practice. It was a direct threat to his child delivered with calculated precision to maximize psychological impact. The remainder of the event proceeded without further incident. The observers maintained their positions but made no additional approaches. Community engagement remained strong with sign-up sheets for various programs and initiatives filling rapidly. On the surface, the public announcement achieved everything they had hoped, generating enthusiasm, answering questions, and building momentum for the center's official opening. As the event wound down and community members began dispersing, Sheriff Parker approached Jack and Victoria with FBI agent Lawson at his side. "We need to talk." "Not here." 20 minutes later, they gathered in the sheriff's office. Jack, Victoria, Agent Lawson, and Mike, whose military background and involvement with the project made him a valuable asset. Sheriff Parker closed the blinds before addressing the group. Those men weren't just Brooks' corporate security. At least 3 of them have known ties to Blackstream Solutions, a private military contractor that operates in legal gray areas. They provide deniable services to corporations, wealthy individuals, and occasionally governmental entities that need problems solved without official fingerprints. Agent Lawson picked up the thread, his expression grim. Blackstream recruits primarily from military special operations backgrounds. They're sophisticated, well-equipped, and operate with extreme discipline. Their presence here represents a significant escalation. Victoria's analytical mind immediately processed the implications. Brooks has moved beyond corporate resources to private military contractors. That suggests he's operating outside official Reynolds Technologies channels, possibly using personal funds or resources from his other backers. Jack placed the photograph on the sheriff's desk, his voice tight with controlled anger. They delivered this to Victoria during the presentation. "That's my daughter, in our home, this morning." The image silenced the room. Sheriff Parker examined it with professional assessment despite his personal connection to Jack's family. "This crosses every line. I'm putting a deputy on your house immediately." Agent Lawson studied the photograph with equal concern. "This isn't just intimidation anymore. It's a direct threat against a minor. We have grounds for federal involvement now beyond the corporate espionage elements we've been monitoring." The validation of the threat's seriousness provided some cold comfort, but Jack's primary focus remained practical. "What are our options? I need to ensure Lily's safety while we deal with this situation." The discussion that followed explored various security measures from round-the-clock protection to temporarily relocating Jack and Lily to a safer location. Each option carried disadvantages, particularly in terms of disrupting Lily's sense of security and normalcy. The challenge was finding a balance between physical safety and psychological well-being for a child who had already lost one parent to tragedy. Victoria remained unusually quiet during the tactical discussion, her expression becoming increasingly resolute as she listened. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the decisive authority that had built her company from startup to tech giant. "This has gone far enough. These people are threatening a child to protect their business interests. It's time to change the equation." All eyes turned to her as she outlined a bold counter-strategy. Rather than continuing to play defense against Brooks' escalating threats, they would take the offensive by going public with everything: the surveillance technology, Brooks' corruption, the intimidation tactics, and the partnership with Blackstream. Not through law enforcement channels alone, which could be delayed or influenced, but through simultaneous release to multiple media outlets, complete with documentation and evidence. "It's a nuclear option," Victoria acknowledged, her expression unyielding. "Brooks will fight back with everything he has. Reynolds Technologies stock will take a significant hit. My position as CEO will be in jeopardy. But it will force the issues into the open where Blackstream can operate effectively and where Brooks will have to defend his actions publicly rather than maneuvering in the shadows." The strategy was high risk, but aligned with everything they had been building toward: transparency over secrecy, public accountability over private power, community values over corporate expediency. Most importantly, it would transform the nature of the threat from covert intimidation to public controversy, potentially providing better protection for Lily and the broader community. Agent Lawson raised practical concerns about timing and coordination with ongoing federal investigations. Sheriff Parker worried about Riverdale becoming the center of a media firestorm. Mike questioned whether making everything public might actually accelerate Brooks's timeline, forcing him to act before his operations were completely exposed. Jack listened to all perspectives, weighing each consideration against what mattered most: Lily's safety and the community's right to determine its own future without external manipulation. When he finally spoke, his decision carried the quiet certainty that had come to define his leadership style. We do it. Full transparency, no half measures. But we build in specific protections for Lily and other vulnerable community members. And we make absolutely clear that the Innovation Center continues regardless of corporate drama, that this community's future isn't contingent on Reynolds Technologies' internal politics or Brooks's corrupt agenda. The decision shifted the atmosphere in the room from reactive defense to proactive planning. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a coordinated strategy for information release, security measures, and community communication. Each person contributed specialized knowledge. Agent Lawson's understanding of federal investigations, Sheriff Parker's community protection capabilities, Mike's tactical security experience, Victoria's corporate and media insights, and Jack's understanding of how to frame the message for maximum community resilience. As the meeting concluded, Victoria pulled Jack aside, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine concern. This path means I'll be fighting for my company's future while you're fighting for your communities. The demands on both of us will be enormous. Are you certain this is what you want? The question went beyond tactical considerations to something more personal, the recognition that their partnership had evolved beyond professional collaboration into something neither had fully acknowledged. Jack thought of Lily's excitement about the ideas corner, Ellen's renewed hope for her cafe's future, the mill workers who had approached him with tears in their eyes at seeing their workplace honored rather than abandoned. Then he thought of the photograph, the implied threat to everything he held most dear. I'm certain about what matters. Jack's voice carried quiet conviction. The center matters. This community's right to shape its own future matters. Showing Lily that we don't back down from bullies no matter how powerful matters. Victoria held his gaze, searching for confirmation of the unspoken question beneath the surface. And us? What happens when this is over one way or another? Jack didn't have a neat answer, only an honest one. I don't know. But I want to find out if that's something you want too. The admission hung between them, an acknowledgement that whatever was developing between them deserved the chance to grow beyond crisis response into something chosen rather than merely circumstantial. Victoria's expression softened vulnerability, briefly visible beneath her strategic exterior. It is. Her simple confirmation carried more weight than elaborate declarations might have. But first, we have a battle to win. As they rejoined the others to finalize details, Jack felt an unexpected sense of clarity, despite the danger and uncertainty ahead. By choosing to confront Brooks's tactics openly, rather than retreating into defensive postures, they were already winning the most important victory, refusing to let fear determine their actions or corrupt their values. The machinery of their counterstrike began moving immediately. Victoria connected with trusted journalists at major outlets, preparing to release comprehensive documentation of Brooks' activities. Agent Lawson coordinated with FBI cybercrime specialists to secure digital evidence before it could be deleted. Sheriff Parker increased security around key community locations, particularly focused on Jack's home and Lily's school. That evening, as preparations accelerated, Jack sat with Lily on their back porch swing. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, familiar comforts that seemed more precious in the face of potential disruption. Lily leaned against him contentedly, describing the day's adventures at school, while coloring in a picture of what appeared to be an elaborate treehouse. "Daddy, will the bad people go away when the special building is finished?" Her question emerged without preamble, the concern she had been carrying revealed with characteristic directness. Jack chose his words carefully, determined to be truthful without burdening her with adult complexities. Sometimes people who are afraid of new ideas try to stop them. But that doesn't mean the ideas aren't good or important. Lily considered this with solemn attention, like when Emma's big brother said girls couldn't build robots, but then our class made the best robot in the whole science fair. The comparison made Jack smile despite his worries. Exactly like that, some people think technology should only be for certain people in certain places. We're showing that it can be for everyone, everywhere. Lily nodded, accepting this explanation with the pragmatic worldview of childhood. Ms. Victoria said, my ideas corner will help people think of things nobody has thought of before. That's important, right? That's one of the most important things in the world, Squirt. Jack pulled her closer, her small body warm against his side as the swing rocked gently. Finding new ways to solve problems, creating things that help people. That's how the world gets better. As darkness settled around them and stars emerged in the clear Pennsylvania sky, Jack felt the weight of responsibility and the strength of purpose in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a public battle with uncertain outcomes. Brooks and his allies would fight back with everything at their disposal. The community would face disruption and potential division as outside forces attempted to undermine their collective resolve. But in this moment, with his daughter safe beside him and a clear path of action ahead, Jack found unexpected peace. They had chosen to stand up rather than back down, to build, rather than retreat to face intimidation with courage rather than caution. Whatever came next, those choices already represented a victory of sorts, an affirmation that communities could still determine their own futures despite powerful interests arrayed against them. As Lily drifted to sleep against his shoulder, Jack gazed toward the distant silhouette of the mill, now illuminated by security lights as construction continued even into the evening hours. The building that had once represented Riverdale's past was becoming a bridge to its future, a physical manifestation of the belief that what people built together mattered more than what powerful interests decided for them. Tomorrow would bring conflict, but tonight offered clarity. Some fights couldn't be avoided without surrendering something essential. Some stands had to be taken regardless of cost. Some values had to be defended, not despite the risks, but because of what those risks revealed about what truly mattered. In that quiet moment of resolve, Jack Harmon, carpenter, father, reluctant community leader, found himself exactly where he needed to be, standing on the foundation built by those who came before, creating something that would serve those who would come after, guided by values that transcended both past and future to illuminate the present moment with unmistakable purpose.